Record.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We will be getting started in 1 minute. Thank you for coming, joining us today.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning.
Is it cool where everybody's at? I know we had beautiful weather here in Ohio. And, when I say it, it'd be like Ohio, because everything just changes. But hopefully everybody is experiencing great weather. It's a little cool here today. Yeah.
Yes. It's cold. I'm in Connecticut, and it's fairly cool today.
Oh, wow.
Where
Okay.
are you in Connecticut? I lived in Cheshire for years.
Oh, Bridgeport. I'm in Bridgeport,
Oh,
Connecticut.
okay. I know it well. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
Well, I will ask everyone, if you don't mind, you can put your name, if you put your name, your organization, and where you're from in the chat. If you use your pronouns, please feel free to put in your pronouns as well. And again, we welcome you. Yeah, and I'll go ahead. I think Ben is still letting a few people in. We have some folks connecting, and 1 minute we will get started. I promise. This weather. All right. Thank you, Ben. Okay, it looks like logistically we are set up. If you don't find yourself on mute, please put yourself on mute. Sometimes mute creates an echo. We do love to hear everybody's voice, and I have no qualms against it. But again, as I said, sometimes it creates echoes, and I'm loving the fact that we have people from all over. It's so refreshing to just see how, this work is spread abroad. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I want to greet everyone, and just greet you and welcome you to the Petrochemicals Lunch and Learn series hosted by the Black Appalachian Coalition and Ohio River Valley Institute. My name is Bishop Marcia Dinkins. I am the founder and executive director of Black Women Rising and the Black Appalachian Coalition. Our work exists because we understand that stories are prevalent, stories are necessary, and stories are needed. And in order for us to get the changes that we need, we have to have a counter narrative to the stories that are being told. In addition to that, stories help to change minds and they humanize people. And if we're going to receive the policy changes that we need, we also have to change the minds of the people who are setting the policies in place. As such, we believe to do this, in doing this, we have to be able to create our stories and frame our stories. So this series was developed because we understand that in order to build the power that we need to frame the stories we must tell, we must understand what and who we are opposing, the present and historical context of petrochemicals and other issues that we fight against. We also must understand how the cogs work, what's making everything function, who the actors are, and how they create legacies of harm, divestment from Black, poor, and marginalized communities in Appalachia and beyond. We also understand the legacies of harm, the impact it has on our quality of life and our future generations. So in essence, we understand that this work is not just present day work, but it's legacy work too. We can't just move to change policies. We must be able to drive a counter narrative to dismantle the false assumptions, the false solutions and narratives that's perpetuated regarding our health, our economic well-being, our communities, and our lives. And this is why we are here today, to understand petrochemicals and how it connects to other harms it uses, the impact it has on our lives, and to build ways to amplify our voices and our power to do what? Stop the harm. I am so glad that we have joining us today, Patricia DeMarco. Patty has authored 2 books, Pathways to a Sustainable Future, and In the Footsteps of Rachel Carson, Harnessing Earth's Healing Power. Patty is a member of Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. She is the vice president of Forest Hills Borough Council, and she is also an educator. I'm glad that Patty is joining us today because she's going to take us on a deep dive of understanding petrochemicals, the industry, and how it functions. In essence, Patty's going to tell us about the actors, the impact, and the history while we've been in the harms it has on our lives. Patty, I'd like to thank you for joining us and taking the opportunity to help create this series and to lead this series on petrochemicals. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much, Marcia. It's an honor and a pleasure to work with you always. I think the best defense you have when you're overwhelmed and outnumbered and when the mainstream message is so toxic is to know the facts and to know where we're coming from, to be able to speak from a point of knowledge and from a base of understanding. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll give you an overview of where we are. See that one and share it. Can you all see that? Everybody can see that?
Looks good.
Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
So this is session one. We're going to do an overview and look toward how we get independence from petrochemicals. You know that we have a climate crisis upon us where we really need to stop burning these fossil fuels. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came to be so dependent on all of these petrochemicals, where they came from, what they're used for, and then we'll go from there. So this whole series is once a month, starting today with an overview, and then we're going to talk about the health harms in the air, water, and land pollution and its direct and indirect effects on our health. Those of us who live among it and those of us who are affected by it because it's distributed throughout. And then we're going to talk about what we can control. What are the things that we can do ourselves that will keep us from being so badly exposed to the harms. And then we're going to look at the better choices and how we take action. So I hope you will join us for the whole series and bring people with you to come so we can understand how we can go together. The link, which Ben will put in the chat again, allows you to register for the whole series, and you can join us every month. And we'll be having different people join our conversation through the course of this series. So looking at how we can empower our independence from petrochemicals, first of all, I wanted to go through some of the sources and uses of petrochemicals, a kind of a history of the industry, how that came to be, not just fuels, but also chemicals and plastics, and then how we can develop a sense of independence from these resources and some of the environmental and social justice issues. This figure on the first page here shows you a community living in the shadow of a Wilmington, California neighborhood from a Phillips 66 petroleum, which makes crude oil into gasoline and other products. And you can see that people are living right really up against the fence posts. These kinds of situations are not healthy for the people who live there or for the communities in which they are situated. So I'm going to go through these in order. First one is coal, partly because it's one of the oldest fossil fuels that we've used. It's mined in 9 states: Wyoming, Montana, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Texas, Illinois, Alabama, and New Mexico. And it produces 577.5 million tons of coal on average every year. It employs about 55,000 people, and that's declining since 2022, and it's down from about 80,000 people in 2014. The coal industry is under orders from the EPA for continuing reductions in emissions, and a lot of times those reductions come from just closing coal-fired power plants. The coal is used mostly for generating electric power in this country. It is about 91.9% of the use of coal is for electric power. It's also used in industrial applications, in coke plants for making steel, in industrial combined heat and power plants, and other industrial uses. It's used somewhat in the commercial sector and a very trace amount remaining in residential and transportation. This is a picture of the Clairton Coke Works in the Pittsburgh area where I live. I live just on the top of the next hill over here. And people live right against the emissions from this plant, which has been operating since the 1800s. In the petrochemical area, this is oil mostly. It's drilled out of the ground or in the ocean, and it's on a global distribution process. This is the petrochemical thing. It is even called petrodollars because it's traded on a global basis, and the pricing is also on a global basis. The principal producers besides the United States are Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Russia. I'm sorry, I keep jumping this. And it is an international market, so there's a lot of transportation involved, both on the ocean and through pipelines. And the pricing of this product is set on a global scale. Now you get crude oil and it goes into a boiler, and they break it apart by making it heated, and then they distill off different levels depending on the amount of heat. So the lowest boiling point things come off first. Those would be the gases, and those are usually put into liquefied petroleum products of some kind, propane and butane. They're often used for heating fuels like propane tanks. Then comes off the naphthalenes, and they all go into gasoline. So this is where you get the gas for your car. And then the kerosenes, which are used also in jet fuel. And then you get the diesel fuel, which is often used in trucks and trains. And then heavy fuel oil, which is like motor oil and lubricants of various kinds. And then the coker plant down on the bottom. This is industrial fuel for heavy waxes and lubricants. And at the very bottom, you get asphalt, which is used for roofing tar and road tar and other kinds of things. And this distillation process happens in one of those big, building installations like I showed you in the previous two pictures. They're huge operations, lots of pipes, lots of smoke, lots of emissions usually come from these proper operations. And then the sources and uses also of natural gas, which is also a fossil petrofuel. It's produced in 39 states around the United States, and it's also a byproduct for both oil and coal production. In the olden days, they would just flare the gases that came off of the oil fields and the coal plants, and they would burn it right on site. Nowadays, they capture that because it has economic value. And it's nowadays in our country, especially, it is secured by hydraulic fracturing, which is a deep drill into the ground and then cracking the rock and bringing the gas up to the surface. So what they do is you drill it from either hydraulic fracturing or traditional wells, and you separate the liquids and the water, and then you have some of it which is vented and flared. They put it in then to a gas processing plant, and they remove some of the contaminants, and non-hydrocarbon gases are also removed. Some of it's returned to the field. A lot of it is vented and flared. And then it goes, the methane part goes to a compressor station, and they either sell it directly, where you might encounter it in your homes or in your homes, or your gas for cooking or heating that would go through a natural gas company. Some of that is taken into storage and used for preserving for high peak periods like wintertime. And some of it is also stored underground, which is part of the strategic reserves. So it's a very complicated system. And here, this is where you would interface it with the utility company and buy it from your gas company, whoever they are, to heat your home or your business or your school. So that it's about 33% of the electricity in the country is produced by natural gas, and it heats over half of the homes. And it's also a raw material for plastic, paint, fertilizers, medicines, antifreeze, propane. Lots of products are made out of natural gas. Oh, go ahead. And then if you look at this as an overview, I know this is a really scary graph, but this is something that's really illuminating to understand about how our energy system flows. If you look starting over on this far right side, you see that overall, this is in 2021 data, because it always lags 2 years. We used 97.3 quadrillion British thermal units of energy, 97.3. Of that, 31.8 actually was used for useful work for energy services, and 65.4 was rejected as waste heat. So 2/3 of the energy that we have consumed in 1 year is rejected as waste heat, and 1/3 is used to do work. So if you look at where the waste happens, you see that the transportation system down here, only a very small amount, almost 6 quadrillion BTUs compared to 21 wasted. This is one of the major sources of waste of energy is in our transportation system. I'll come back to in a minute why. The other one is up here in the generation of electricity. Here you see that 12.9 BTUs went to actual serving of residential, commercial, and industrial, and a little bit to transportation. 2/3 of it goes into the rejected energy, into waste heat. Now, electric generation and transportation depend on technologies that were invented in the late 1800s, 1876 and 1865. These technologies invented in the Victorian age are still the predominant energy forms for our use for transportation and electricity production today. I think it's time for an update because these things are really out of date, inefficient, and we have better ways to go forward. But this is the major source of our use of petrochemicals. Here you see in the electric sector, the black is coal and the blue is natural gas. And then we also have nuclear, we have some wind now, and we have some solar now. This is new. They didn't even put wind, geothermal, and solar on this chart until 2 years ago. They just put renewables in a general lump. So the fact that we're actually counting the data in a separated way is really significant. The other thing to notice is that our transportation sector is still predominantly based on gasoline, petroleum, crude oil. This is still a very heavily saturated with fossil fuels. So these are the sectors where we really have options to pay attention to making better choices and changing out these fuels. Okay, and there's about 7% of the fossil resources, mostly a little bit of coal and natural gas and petroleum, that is used for non-combustion purposes. These are things that end up in products that you might see every day: plastics, pharmaceuticals, herbicides, pesticides, fertilizer, all kinds of things come from the petrochemical byproducts that are not combustion products. This isn't something you burn for fuel, but only 7% of our fossil resources are used to make all of these things. And I want you to think between now and the next time I see you about all the things that you might use every day that are based on petrochemical products. Just notice on your daily activities, what kinds of things are they in the textiles, in the clothing that you wear? Are they in the pharmaceutical products, in the things that you use every day, you know, cutlery, glasses, containers, products that you use for cleaning your house and taking care of personal care items? A lot of these things have petrochemical sources. Also cosmetics. A lot of these are made from natural gas and from petroleum byproducts, and things like shoes and you know, all kinds of products. If you start noticing, you'd be surprised how much of the stuff we use every day comes from the non-combustion parts of petrochemical use. So a little bit of history of the petrochemical industry. We have fossil fuel deposits under the ground, and the earliest use that we find of this was from indigenous spiritual leaders who noticed seeps in the ground and would ignite them as sources of spiritual inspiration. They were mysterious and considered gifts of the gods. They were not used for any application purpose. They were mostly used as an elevation of their spiritual experience. And nowadays, the petrochemical industry is managed by about 10 major petrochemical industries who control not only the prices and the production in this country, but they're really multinational corporations. They're not accountable to anybody, and their shareholders are their chief beneficiaries, and they are not under the jurisdiction of any individual company, any individual country rather. So let me go back here. The crude oil and coal and natural gas are all fossil fuels. That means they were formed millions, 300 million years ago in the ocean and in the ground. The plants that lived in that time would die and are buried under layers and layers of rock. And then over 100 million years, that sediment decomposed those organic remains under immense heat and pressure. And it, over millions of years of time, it formed the fossil fuels that we know as coal and oil and natural gas. And they're accessed from drilling through all these layers of rock down to where the sediments have accumulated. And these are attributed to periods of time when there were major shifts in the conditions of the earth, so that all of the plant life died at one time, and then formed those layers of sediment in the antique rock. The same with coal. In the swamp areas 300 million years ago, before the dinosaurs, many, many giant plants died in the swamps and were layered and layered and layered into, you know, if you ever have a pond and you have to clean it out, you see there's a big black muck in the bottom. Well, over a period of long time, that would turn into coal. And they were buried under water and dirt and compressed with the heat. And then that became the plant material that turned into coal. Now, one of the other things that happened during this period when the plant material was occurring and growing in profusion was as they began to do photosynthesis, starting way, way back, they would have oxygen created as part of the photosynthesis process. And so we began to accumulate large amounts of oxygen in the air. And then this is the ice age when it dipped off and then it took back up. Now we are in a period where we are using up the oxygen as we're burning all of the fossil fuels that created this. We are reversing in about hundreds of years, things that took millions of years to form. So this is a way that we are connected to the creatures of the long past, because they created the atmosphere that allowed animals such as people and other animals that breathe air to exist. And so it was a long, millions and millions of years process to reach the state where we are now. And now we see that over history, starting in the 1700s, mostly in the colonial period, all the way up until the end of the 1860s, 1870s, we primarily used things like wood and hydropower for mechanical shaft power, and a little bit of like whale oil. We began using coal in the early 1800s. It started in England and then transferred over here. And then we did a very small amount of petroleum early on, mostly as lubricants. And then starting in the end of the 1800s, this was the age of coal. And it grew with the dawn of industrialization, and it remains a significant part of our fuel mix even today. And again, the oil and gas ramped up through the 1920s through today. And you can see times when we've had recessions, or this is the oil embargo of 1973. And you can see it goes up and down with time. And renewable energy and solar is commercially entering into the picture down here in the very bottom, and it is growing rapidly. Nuclear was advanced after the Second World War, and it has had an up and down trajectory. It's leveled off and is expected to go down. And we have a number of policies now that are strongly promoting the use of renewable energy. But when people tell you that this is such a small amount, it'll never catch up, remember that image of all of the waste in the systems that we're using now for using petroleum, natural gas, and coal, especially for transportation and for production of electricity. Those processes only use about a third or less of the value of the fuel to make the energy that we actually use. So as you look at replacing these systems with renewable systems, we look at a different way of making the energy that actually does the work. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, our economy relied on wood and hydropower. There were things like granaries and sawmills along the textile mills were all located along rivers where they had big hydropower, things that turned all the wheels. If you've ever been to McConnell's mill, you can see one in operation that was a granary that had huge stones driven by water power that ground the grain into flour. And the communities were centered around these. And then in the Midwest, in the plains, they used wind machines for irrigation and to tap into water aquifers so that they could grow crops on otherwise fairly barren land. And we also, when coal came into the picture, we began to have not only people heating their houses with coal, and you would shovel it, they would dump it into the sidewalk and they shovel it down a coal chute. I remember my father doing this at my house. We used to play in the coal heap when I was little. I actually found some fossils when I was young. They made me throw them away because they were dirty. I wish I'd kept them so I could show them to you. But it persisted as the main driver of energy and transportation all the way through until the 1950s. And the incentives for coal development that were set into law in the 1860s remain today, especially the mineral rights supremacy over surface rights for access, using federal lands for mining and drilling, and then numerous tax incentives that are available that were put in place in the 1800s to help drive the Industrial Revolution that ran the steel mills. And the first operations of the steel mills were to make rails, the steel rails for railroad cars and locomotives, the plate metal for locomotives, and had a coal car right behind the engine where they would shovel the coal in to make that engine go on a steam engine train. So the steel mills then branched out beyond just locomotive and transportation pieces into making automobiles and all kinds of other metal-based I-beams for construction and various other things. But the very first industrial applications were to drive the railroads. And the coal barons and the railroad barons were linked tightly and created vast empires of wealth on the extraction of coal and the use of coal to make steel. And those companies, remain in power today. U.S. Steel from the Carnegie and Vanderbilt and the railroads, they made huge empires of wealth for their own corporate interests and their own families. And it was often driven by the labor of people who were not paid well for the work that they did. So there we go. When the transportation sector was initially animal driven, you had horses, you had cattle, you had oxen, you had animal working on the farm, pulling plows, driving vehicles. And then in the 1900 to 1913 period, they began to shift to automobiles. And there were some interesting conflicts where automobiles and horses had to share the road. Horses would often get startled by the cars and you'd have runaway carriage situations. There were no rules of the road. Horses would get stuck in the mud and have to be pulled out. Cars would get stuck in the mud and have to be pulled out by horses. And there were things like barn fires because people didn't know how to handle the gasoline, and they would end up having barns catch on fire and burn down. There wasn't a good fuel distribution system. So over the period by 1950, they had developed traffic laws and traffic signals. Horses will not run into each other on purpose. Cars, the drivers are not so careful. So when they all wanted to drive and there weren't any rules of the road, it was kind of like a game of chicken to drive anywhere because everybody was driving and they didn't have any rules. We had to do road improvements so you didn't get horses to pull out the cars that get stuck in the mud. And there had to be a whole infrastructure for dispensing fuel. And then they had to license the drivers and the vehicles so you could keep track of them. And also those fees, as well as fuel taxes, paid for all the roads. Now we have gas-powered cars, trucks, vans, all kinds of small equipment everywhere. There were also a number of businesses that went out of business. This is a general blacksmithing and horseshoeing operation. Not a lot of use for that by the 50s, because when you had cars around everywhere, there were many fewer horses that needed a blacksmith, and there were many fewer tack shops for harness and saddle and all kinds of things of that nature. So if you look at this transition that happened, it took less than 50 years to have that major shift from mostly animal transportation to mostly automated transportation. And as we're looking now, shifting away from fossil fuel driven cars to electric or some other kind of transportation, and enhancing non-motorized vehicle transit options for communities, these kinds of transitions are going to require their own infrastructure of laws that are appropriate to things that we're facing today. We need to begin paying attention to that. Should there be public charging stations so that everyone doesn't have to have a charging station in their garage? We've already had lithium battery fires in garages because they blow up and people don't know how to deal with them. So it's something to think about as we go forward. Then natural gas followed oil development. It was originally, gas was used for lamp lighting, and both in the streets and also in houses. And it was seen as a major replacement for whale oil and candles in the lighting area. And so that was its primary use for a long time. But then when the coal mines began to produce a lot of extra gas, they began to shift now from oil and coal to gas for home heating altogether. It was also partly in response to the outcry of massive air pollution in the cities. I know when I was growing up, my house burned coal, and there was smoke coming out of the chimney all the time in the winter. Everything was black from the soot. Your clothes you would hang under the porch, not out in the sun, because there would be clinkers coming down from the sky at all times. People wore those big brimmed hats and veils to keep from getting soot on your faces. And housewives worried about ring around the collar because you would get your neck dirty from just being outdoors. And this was something that people just did. They said, well, it's convenient to have heat in your home. It's convenient to not have, you know, to light the gas lanterns. You can burn electricity and have it come into your house. It was seen as a major improvement. However, when there were a lot of coal strikes and there were access problems that accelerated the use of gas as well. And it became a regulated utility in 1954 if there was interstate distribution. So the southern states where they produced gas, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Louisiana, the gas was very cheap. But in the northern states, they would close industries and schools and public buildings many times in the wintertime because you couldn't get gas. So it became a regulated commodity, and the pricing and distribution was regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and also within the states, the pricing of natural gas is regulated as a public utility. Now, the United States produces about 4% of the world's natural gas. Much of what we extract in the United States is sent as export through liquid natural gas exporting ports. There's one in Philadelphia that's the closest to us. There's also one in the Gulf of Mexico, which is also a refinery area, and there's one in California. So one of the things that is really significant to understand is that we have pipelines everywhere to move the oil and gas. Coal mostly moves by train or on barges, but this is the crude oil and refined product pipeline just for the interstate ones. Within states, there's another whole pipeline network that distributes the gasoline to more local areas. And these red dots are the areas where there are refineries within the United States. So you can see there are many, many, many communities that are affected by these refinery operations and having distribution centers radiating out. You can see here's one that goes into Illinois and Indiana, and over here in Ohio, you have several, and in Pennsylvania, you have several here along the coast. So our immediate region is significantly affected by this industry. And the gas lines are even more prolific. The red ones are interstate pipelines, and the blue ones are, other ways. The blue ones are interstate pipelines that go between states, and the red ones are intrastate pipelines. So they distribute into the middle of a metropolitan area, and then the red ones go within the state. And they're regulated in different ways. But you can see that underground beneath us, there's a whole network of pipelines. These are subject to rupture and explosion in many cases. You saw the one in East Palestine, which was a train, but this is the same sort of thing that happens with oil pipelines and gas pipelines. You have potential source for explosions and hazards. And communities are at risk. This is a gas pipeline explosion in Sissonville, West Virginia, that occurred a few years ago, and it causes a significant amount of disruption to the communities around, as well as danger. And many times these things happen in a place that's remote, but sometimes they happen in places that are very close into where communities are, where people live. And so I know in my community, we have an emergency response plan in case of something like this happening, because there are 4 train trestle intersections within our immediate community area where trains go over old trestles carrying, hundreds of cars at a time of oil, liquid, or chemical liquids in their cargo vans. So people have begun to protest the pipelines and protest the expansion of oil and gas pipelines in order to protect their neighbors, their water security, and also the climate. And this is going on in communities, where they're marching in solidarity for all kinds of causes, protecting their homes. And the police have responded with rather violent ways. This is the Dakota pipeline protest, where the reservation people are defending the Ogdalala Reservoir, which serves water to close to 4 million people in the middle of the state. And this is a protest banner. I've actually carried this banner on occasion in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. This is a fracking protest where people are saying you can't drink money, and the fracking damages our drinking water. So this is now been responded to by 40 states have enacted prohibitions against this kind of protesting of pipelines, because they've deemed them as essential infrastructure, and the protesters are deemed as terrorists. And so they feel that it's justified to attack them and treat them badly and violate their freedom of speech. So now, of course, there are counter lawsuits from people who are defending the right to protest as a freedom of speech under the First Amendment of the Constitution. And there are cases pending in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and South Dakota right now. There also will be one in New York. So the whole situation is a public policy dialogue where people who are affected by these pipelines in their neighborhoods, where they're worried about their water, where they're worried about their children, worried about the value of their homes, are saying, we already have enough pipelines. We have enough pipelines. They're everywhere. We had no say in where they were put. Nobody asked us if it was okay to put a pipeline in our community under our homes, if it was okay to put a refinery next to where we live. Nobody asked us. And yet we suffer the consequences, and we have the right to say we don't want any more. So this is a very active and a very contentious debate going on in public policy matters right now around these industries. And of course, we have to face the reality that we are in an existential crisis in this century. I mean, a live and die situation. We are in a climate emergency, not just from the climate change itself and the global pollution that's associated with it, but also with the loss of biodiversity, the loss of habitat, and the challenge to the livability of our planet, even for people. This is not something that is trivial, and more people are saying we need to address the root causes of these conditions, or they're going to continue to get worse. And of course, we need to understand that that is not something we want to sustain. The earth, the living earth, is our life support system. It's fueled by the power of the sun, and it gives us clean water, fertile ground, fresh air, and all of the biodiversity, all the species that live on this earth that are part of the interconnected web of life, which we are part of as well. And that system, that living system, that intricate, complicated, beautiful system of the living earth is under stress. And the chief sources of that stress are the combustion of those fossil fuels that I was describing to you, burning coal, oil, and natural gas. The extraction of those resources from the land causes massive amounts of destruction. And also the overtone of we have to have more stuff. The hyperconsumption as a standard of living is part of this because it uses more and more and more fossil fuels to maintain. And as the population increases with an aspiration to have the lifestyle that we have in this country, if we did that all over the world, it would be 5.5 planets worth of resources, and we have only one. So we need to be careful. And we have to be warned because the fantasy solutions that are coming forward, the beginning one was Marcellus Shale natural gas is a bridge fuel. It's going to be the marvel. It'll replace all the jobs that we lost in the steel industry and the coal industry. We're going to have all kinds of opportunities through the petrochemical complex and the plastics. They were planning 5 of those plastic hubs all down the Ohio River Valley. And then they're now talking about a hydrogen hub, which is also based on natural gas extraction. And then you remember the pictures of the power plants and that we waste 2/3 of the energy that we make when we make electricity. Well, they're now talking about capturing that carbon that comes out of the smokestacks and putting it underground, the same ground where they're cracking the rock to get out the natural gas. Now, I don't know, last time I looked, when you put something into a cracked material, it's going to leak, right? We have no guarantee that this sequestration is going to do anything except make a lot more pipelines and cost a lot more money. And there's a House bill which gives subsidies for these operations for 30 years out to 2050, but they're fighting even minimal tax incentives and subsidies for renewable energy. So this is what we're up against. This is what I call the fantasy solutions. And then you have the real solutions, where the Reimagine Appalachia process decided we don't want 5 petrochemical hubs down the whole length of the Ohio River Valley. We don't want any more coal fields. We don't want any more gas fields. We don't want to be producing hydrogen from cracking up the land or stripping off the land in order to make things that are just going to make the situation worse. These are still fossil fuel-based solutions, and these are not the solutions that we want here for our future. We had 45 listening sessions across Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky to talk about what we would like to have as a fate for our future. And it was not more coal fields, more gas fields, more plastic, or blue hydrogen made from fracking natural gas. This is not the vision we have for our children. What we did have is in mind a transformation of the system that we're in. This isn't a simple solution. It isn't substituting one fuel for another. It isn't trying to do things the way we've done them in the past. It's more like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, where you take all the resources that you've accumulated, you restructure, reshape, and repurpose them into something better, something beautiful and finer. And that is the future we want for our children and for our own selves. You have to understand the laws of nature are not negotiable. You cannot burn things in a rapid period of time, reversing processes that took millions of years, because you will poison the atmosphere that we depend on. We have to rebalance the social safety net with compassion and equity as priorities. Right now, the economy drives everything ever since the Ronald Reagan administration, where economic determinism became the centerpiece of our policymaking. The environmental values and social values have been diminished. And these things have had an effect of reducing the amount of concern for society, for protecting the life support system in the form of natural water, air, and land quality, and recognize that we have natural capital in those resources that give our country its true greatness. And we need to restore the land so that we can empower the people to have a better life, restore the balance between economy, society, and environment so that we can have a sustainable society where our children can thrive and where we're not struggling just to survive. And we can reach independence from fossil fuels in a transformation that takes the fossil energy system and converts it to renewable energy systems that conserve and restore resources, where you can have coexistence of your energy system with daily activities that don't poison people, and where you can employ many, many people doing energy efficiency improvements and upgrades and designing systems, for example, where buildings make more energy than they use and therefore contribute to the production of power across the whole grid. You can practice regenerative agriculture for a non-toxic food system that captures carbon naturally in fertile ground and in growing plants. This is a rehabilitated abandoned mine land, which is going to be planted to wheat. And, oh geez, I'm sorry. And can be used to restore land by planting crops that have long perennial grasses, and where you have people owning small farms. This is a Black farmer giving directions on use of her field. This is part of the new farm bill that we have to really support, is the empowering of small family farmers again, instead of large industrial monocrops. And we'll talk about this in a future session in more detail. And this is the Black Urban Gardeners Association in Pittsburgh. We have now 400 urban farms in just the city of Pittsburgh area alone. Many of them are coming under the protection of the Allegheny Land Trust so that community gardens can be preserved as gardens and not be taken over under development pressure from surrounding areas. So I get really excited about regenerative agriculture. I could talk about this all day, but I won't. Then the third one is to move our manufacturing system away from this raw material to trash approach that we've had so far, and go into a circular economy for materials that are designed to be reused from benign materials, and stop using fossil materials to make things that are going to be thrown away immediately, like plastic bags, all kinds of things that are designed to be used once and throw away. We can look at using things that are biodegradable, like bamboo and hemp and algae. You can make all kinds of things out of these products that are grown in ways that preserve and restore the land and provide you materials that you can use for a long time. But when you get done with them, they're not toxic and they don't take 400 to 1,000 years to degrade in the environment. This is the way of the future, designing things to be used again, designing things to last. I know the president has talked many times about remade and made in America. If we're going to do that, you can't do raw material to trash and expect to have a sustainable and a viable economy and a country that is beautiful and a quality of life that we want to have. So we have to look at manufacturing without the pollution, the clean economy in renewable energy systems, not just fuel replacement, regenerative food production that restores the land and captures carbon, and circular material management by design. It meets the needs of communities and it builds a sustainable future. This is an example of some ways that this is happening already. EOS Energy makes non-lithium utility scale batteries in a way that can be made in a community because it doesn't make any pollution and is distributed locally and is returned every 15 years to be recharged and restored. So it's designed to be reused. Epic Metals make steel out of recovered and reused material. They make space frames and structural steel. Car industries is making all kinds of pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals using strictly plant-based resources. They don't use any petrochemical resources in their operation or in their production. And it's a worldwide industry started right here in Pittsburgh. So these things are already in motion. They're not new. This is not rocket science. We know what the answers are. We just have to decide that we're going to get there. And we have a vision of the Mon Valley rising from the ashes. We have a vision for resilience and shared prosperity, not where a few people do very well and the rest of us struggle. We want the natural infrastructure that has made us a wonderful place to live still to be revived. The rivers are still here for transportation, for water, for recreation. We need to restore the value of those rivers, the access to them by people. And we need to harness the intellectual capital of our universities. They spin out 125 companies a year in Pittsburgh. Only 5% of them stay here. They all go away because the business advantages are better other places. We need to look at what does it take to keep them home and to keep them growing where we are. And then we still have the ethic of working, the determination of workers to do well and to make their life better. And we need to invest in our communities so that we can go forward together and that make that a true shared prosperity. This disparity of 5% do very, very well and everybody else struggles is not a model we want to perpetuate forward. So the nature of work in the clean energy opportunity is the opportunity we can capture. Clean energy production, energy efficiency, and environmental management. And you have job opportunities of all educational levels from high school all the way up to a college degree in all of these areas. And there are many more. These are just the ones in the energy economy. There's, in the agricultural space and in the manufacturing space, there are also equivalent things. And I'll talk to you more about that in future sessions. Went the wrong way. So I want to, give you a sense of hope that, we really have the power in our hands to make transformative changes. It's happened on a global scale. This is Wangari Maathai's Greenbelt movement in Kenya, where she empowered women to plant trees that supported local and native crops in abundance. And millions and millions and millions of women participated in this and has transformed the whole landscape of her country as a result of that. And we're doing that a little bit at a time. This is the Kincaid Community Garden out of the Tralee and Allegheny Land Trust collaboration. And this is the kind of thing where you get people together, you get a community garden, you secure it from development, and this is now 2 or 3 generations worth of stuff growing here. And you have to have a thought from Rachel Carson as we close this one. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. So we need to really protect the beauty of the earth, protect the living systems that we depend on, and then we will endure, we will thrive, and we will have a wonderful quality of life as a result. We need to make this policy U-turn. We need to move from just being aware of the problem, worrying about it, to become outraged and to demand the policy solutions that we know we need in order to reach a sustainable future. We need to look at building support for these kinds of actions and increase the political pressure on the people who represent us that we have to make these changes. If we continue the path we're on, we're not going to get to a viable range of temperature change in our planet. We need to move in this direction, not that direction. And in order to do that, we have to increase the political pressure on the people who represent us. And we need to increase the social pressure to make it okay. We need to have a better narrative, the story of success, the story of the sustainable future that we want, and make that the mainstream, make that the aspiration stream, instead of the one that we've had that says, oh, it's so convenient to have things, use it once and throw it away because that's how we make money. That's how we make disaster. We need to recapture a different message, a better message, a message of hope and a message of sharing and caring for each other in our own communities. So we have to ensure that there's community benefit to the money that is spent on behalf of taxpayers. If it's federal money going to projects, we have to be sure there's community input and accountability, that they include good wages and healthcare and retirement benefits for their workers, and that we have a career pathways for women, Black, Indigenous people, other workers of color, and other people altogether. We have to have paid on-the-job training opportunities, and we need to have ways to build local wealth. These things have to be part of any federal dollar that goes out to a private company to invest in the projects. They have to have 20% of that project do community benefits. And we have to be prepared to be involved in those discussions about what we want for our communities, for federal investment to flow to where we are. So join us next time. The Petrochemical Lunch and Learn on Health Harms will happen on June 23rd at noon. And we'll talk about health harms, health effects from fossil and extractive industries, and the pollution of our air, land, and water. And so I will stop sharing my screen and we can have some questions. There we are.
Thank you, Patty, for such an awesome presentation. I do know that there were a few questions in the chat, but I believe that they have been answered.
Okay.
So thank you for that. Is there one question, and maybe you have some additional information, was there have been some presentations on the problem with fossil gas-based hydrogen hubs. And the question is, does anybody remember where these are available? I do know there were some resources put out there in the chat.
I think Orvie has done a very good one, and there are a couple of others. I will give you some resources about it and add it at the end of my, I'll put a resource slide at the end of this when I share it with you, okay? Would that work?
That's fine, thank you. So I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I did want to just kind of, bring to the floor, just ask a few questions myself. Again, but before I do that, if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand and we can bring you off mute. And again, you can feel free to put it in the chat. Dana is saying the graphic on loss of energy to heat waste, are there estimates of that waste heat for solar and wind? Yeah,
the production of power from wind is the cube of the wind-swept area. So the losses are also in the pushing of the power down the line, which is 6%, regardless of the power is made from a hydropower or a thermal power or a wind power generator. The conversion and efficiency of losses of photovoltaic cells vary by the kind of cell, but it's a totally different sort of computation because the sun falls on you for free and the wind blows for free. So it has a different sort of computation of efficiency. It's a question of how much of what falls on the incident surface or in the wind stream, how much of that is captured into usable energy. So in the case of, for example, solar, if you build a passive design house, you're getting gain from the solar for heating and cooling, whether you do anything else or not. And if you put a photovoltaic system on the roof that makes electricity to meet the load of your lighting, your appliances, your stove, your heating system, you then have that displacing something you would otherwise have to buy. So the efficiency conversion is a different kind of computation for renewable energy than it is for the fossil fuel combustion systems, because the combustion process is the Rankine steam cycle in the case of electricity, or the internal combustion engine in the case of gasoline or transportation energy. If you substitute solar or wind for those two sources, if you're still using solar to make a solar turbine power, the efficiencies are the same. But if you're using solar directly to heat water or to heat space or cool space, then it's a different computation altogether.
Thank you for that, Patty.
Mm.
So the one thing is, because I never want to make assumptions that everybody knows. And so on the one slide, when you were speaking about like clothing and, laundry detergent, the different things that we use in our everyday life, the one question that comes to mind is, especially when you're looking at laundry detergent or your makeup, what should people be looking out for when it comes to labels? Because a lot of times, like sugar, we know they change it from sugar to fructose or glucose or sucralose. So what are some of the things that people should look out for, even when it comes to buying your clothes? If you could read what's on the tag these days, it's so small.
You bring I bring a magnifying glass. I carry one around in my purse. Where did I put it? I had it out the other day to show somebody. But the thing is, you have to read the labels. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the health harms, because it'll help you sort out. One good source is the Environmental Working Group puts up a database that lets you look at, it's called Skin Deep, and you can look at things by label, by brand, and find out what is good or not. And I will give you this. Yeah, you can look at it on web. If you just search the Environmental Working Group, the Skin Deep database, you can search products by brand name and it will tell you what is in them and what kind of hazards. So if you have a favorite brand, then you can look up where it stands on the list and get advice about what might be better. But reading the labels is absolutely a good place to start. And getting natural fibers as much as possible for things that don't have microplastics as a byproduct. Because when you wash things that are synthetic, or especially polyesters, they tend to shed little bits of fiber in the water, in the rinse water, and then that ends up in the biosphere. Those little tiny shreds of microplastic are now ubiquitous in the biosphere. It's really terrifying in a lot of ways.
Thank you. And the other thing that I think I want to bring to the fore, and we may also talk about this at another point in the series, is that nowadays people are saying, I know you're seeing this opportunity that you're getting from utility companies saying, hey, we're a renewable especially on the supply side, we're a renewable energy company. And so, equipping individuals, and I think this is one of the reasons why Black is having this Lunch and Learn series and building us up to a point of looking at the policies and what we need to do and how we need to be confronting it. But also this narrative, as you said, the false assumptions or the false solutions, with the fact of, yes, this is renewable energy, but it's really not. And so I think it's like, how do people tell that? Or is there certain things that they should be looking out for, or even questioning, when they call a company?
Yeah, the Public Utility Commission requires that they give the source, the generation mix for the generation company that you choose. In Pennsylvania, it's a choice state. Every state has different regulations, so you need to look at your state regulatory commission page. But the company has to tell you on the back of your bill what their energy mix is. So you can have a company that says, oh, we're a renewable energy company, but their renewable energy is being made in like Vermont or West Virginia or someplace that isn't your state. That means that what you're actually getting is power displaced from that location down the grid, and you're basically going to get what your local grid mix is. Because the electrons that flow on the wire, they don't know or care what generated them. They're all the same. So if you're using a generator that's renewable energy, that's made in your own state, within your own area, that is going to directly displace fossil fuel generation in that area. If you're buying it from somebody who's getting renewable energy credits from another state, they're displacing the power that they generate with the power that's generated close to you. It's just making more renewable energy where they are, and what you're getting is still the mix where you are. So if you want to replace the mix where you live You need to get a local generation company that's making renewable energy that's going to displace energy in the grid area where you actually are. And that way you actually do displace the coal. Like if you're in Pittsburgh and you use community energy, that's based right here in Somerset, and it will displace the coal that's produced right here in Allegheny County. So that's the whole difference in the whole thing.
Thank you for that. I want to thank again, does anybody have a question as we begin to close out? Are there any lingering questions or comments? I saw a lot of thank yous in the chat, Patty, for this presentation, saying how great it is. So I just want to put that out there. Thanking everyone for joining us, and I hope that you continue to follow the series, because again, the overarching theme is to not only educate ourselves, but it is also to empower ourselves to build the power that we need. And, one of the things Patty mentioned is about this narrative, the story that's being told around fossil fuels and the economics and the fact that it produces jobs and all of these, things that really, aren't really real solutions. They're false solutions. But then what happens is they're pitting us, pitting people against the fact that, that I have to live. So when you think about a place like Clariton, here's this coke works plant. There's not many job opportunities. There's food insecurity. And so people really don't say much, because here they're living and dying at the same time, and so that's something, but you have to make that choice, because you also have to eat and you have a family to take care of. And then so many more, so much more. So it's so much that we need to learn. And another reason we're bringing this is not only for us to be able to learn, but it's to be able to tell the story, to understand the story and the counter narrative. And also, when we are empowered, we're empowering ourselves individually as well as collectively, because we also have a fight for our own life, in our own homes. And as Patty mentioned, you can see that it's in medicines, aspirins and penicillin and, cancer treatment drugs. And these are things that we don't know. And it's not pushing a blame. The whole thing is what you don't know, you don't know. And so how do you fight for it? How do you stand up? And our goal is really, through this educational series, as well as to equip people so that you see yourself in the fight. And a lot of times, Black people, poor people, people who are living in marginalized communities or living in deep poverty, along the Appalachian region, and even in our urban, we have to quit breaking off rural Appalachia and all of that, because we're all experiencing the same problems. But at the end of the day, these things are being headed up in Black communities, communities of color, communities that are really hit hard. And as you saw from all of those blue lines, I think if we were to do something, you'd be like, oh, these are some of the poorest communities, the communities that don't have trees, the communities that don't have access to healthcare. They're suffering, from all of the, disparities and the lack of access. And so for us to build the power and for us to be the power that we need to stop the harm, not only do we have to be able to tell the story, but we have to see ourselves in the story to tell the story, to then be able to shift the minds and the hearts of those who are bringing about the harm, and also to be able to organize for the solutions that we need. So again, I want to thank you, Patty, for, such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I want to thank everyone who took time out to have lunch with us today. I encourage you, Patty has 2 books. I believe there's a link in the chat where you can learn more about Patty. You can learn about the 2 books that she's written, the blogs that she's written. Please follow the Black Appalachian Coalition. We have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Go to our website and, check us out. We have a story map on there. There are different ways that you can engage with us, the GIS mapping. I also want to give a shout out to ORVI, Ohio River Valley Institute, for always supporting us in co-creating with us and co-conspiring and just supporting us throughout all of this. And so, I really just can't appreciate them enough. I can't appreciate you all enough. And the other thing is this: stories are important. So I want you to know that Black has a podcast as well across the Ohio River Valley called Black Remembering, Bringing in the Heavy, but also talking about the hope. We'll be launching that in May. We also ask people to share your stories around petrochemicals or, just around, the issues that you care about, because we're putting those stories on the story map. And this is a way of codifying, number one, the stories, because we're at a point right now that, and I hate to say it, but it's the truth, that the Black body and the brown body is under such great attack, from your hair down to the soles of your feet. The way that existence of a person is trying to be eliminated just through policy. And if you want to be a part of the Black, coalition, we invite you to do that, be it you're an organization or an individual. Please, join us in this fight, against the things that impact us the most, because it's going to take us to save us. And if we don't do it, then who does it? So I just want to encourage you all, to join us. Again, go to the website, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But more importantly, after you finish doing all of that, I want you to have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. And we will see you at the next training, June 22nd, noon to 1:30. Bring your lunch, bring your coffee, bring your tea, bring yourself, and also bring a friend. All right. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.